Hey, Andrew Grapsis here, Dungeon Master for 5th edition campaigns on twitch.tv/AAGrapsis. Today I wanted to go over really quickly how to set up a very simple overlay using the free and open source software known as GIMP, which is an image manipulation application. Today we're just going to go over how to choose a background, manipulate the hue, saturation, brightness, exposure for an image so that we can get a nice neutral background going on, create frames for the Dungeon Master and the players, create appropriate transparency layers, and export the resulting ping file. We're not going to go into anything too crazy or too fancy, and I'm going to assume you already have some medium level of understanding of GIMP. If you don't, there are plenty of great GIMP tutorials out there. I just want to show you kind of how I put everything together and organize it and think about it as I'm developing the project. So I hope you enjoy it. Okay, welcome to this episode of Diary of a DM. Today we're going to be talking about building overlays for OBS using GIMP. So the first thing you have to do is go ahead and download GIMP. So if we go to gimp.org, you'll find the GNU image manipulation program. This is free, it's cross-platform. I only use free and open source software for my video editing, my image editing, my pre and post production in terms of audio input, audio connecting, and all of the plugins I use for audio. So for me, using something like GIMP is just what I do. So go ahead and download it and install it. I've obviously already done this, so I'm just going to go ahead and launch GIMP. So this won't be a comprehensive introduction to GIMP. Instead, I'm just going to assume that you've spent maybe a little bit of time playing around in it, and we're just going to focus on the practical aspects associated with creating overlays. So to get started, we're going to want to create an appropriate space with the correct size for beginning our overlays. So we're going to begin by right-clicking, going to File, and then New. This mode will come up, and it's already pre-populated in my case because I've been working with this resolution, but it's 1920 by 1080. So go ahead and say OK. This will give us a blank canvas to begin working with, but we need to fill it with something immediately. The first part we're going to add in here is our background. So in order to find a background, I recommend you go to pixabay.com. And Pixabay is basically a place to find images that are free for commercial use. So anything you find here, you should be able to use. Now, I recommend something relatively neutral. So if you look at the devastations, I use a wood grain texture. Actually, if I minimize my windows, you can see here with the devastations, I've used this wood grain texture. So when you're looking for something, think about an image that would be extremely neutral, something that just provides an appropriate texture for the background, whatever that may be. You don't want to draw away the eye from the players. You can do this by scrolling through, or if you have something in mind, like leather, let's say, you can just do an immediate search. Now, once I've found leather, you can see that there are leather textures here. There are books. The books would probably be too noisy to put behind our players, but a leather texture would probably be fine. There's this cool leather texture here that looks like aged skin. I think we're going to go with that for this because there's a lot of variation in it. Downloads from Pixabay are free, so go ahead and hit free download. You want 1920 by ideally 1080, but in this case we can crop a little bit of it. So go ahead and download. And then wherever you've downloaded it from, go ahead and drag that into GIMP. Okay, once you have your layer in GIMP, go ahead and give it some type of name. We want to just keep making sure that we have appropriate names for things. That way we can keep track of them in the layers. So I'm going to call it background. And now that I have this, I can go ahead and delete this old background over here. And I'm also going to make sure that this particular layer has transparency on it. So I'm going to go over here and say add alpha channel. You may not need to do that step. Okay, now that we have this beautiful image of leather, what I can say about it is it has a lot of highlights and it's very bright. It's very textured. And the problem with that is it will detract from our players and from the webcam views. So we want to dull it down a whole bunch. We want it to still have character, but not as much upfront character as it currently has. Instead, we'd really prefer that it generates this nice neutrality in the background that diffuses the space. So what I want to do is get rid of the highlights on this left-hand section and just overall darken the entire image. The way I'm going to do that is that I'm going to go to colors, and then I'm going to play around with the hue and saturation, the exposure, the shadows and highlights, the brightness and contrast, until I've kind of pulled it all down. And after that, I'm probably going to add some type of vignetting to darken the sides and pull that down as well. So let's go ahead and play with this. There's no right answer for this, except that I generally want to darken everything. I want to pull it down a whole bunch. I may up the contrast. And you'll see that upping the contrast has brought out the highlights a little bit more, but I'm going to take those down later. My goal is to get those darks much darker. And the color intensity is also a little too warm, a little too upfront. We'll pull that down later as well. So if we pull the saturation all the way down, you'll see that this kind of becomes gray. Gray is not necessarily what we're trying to do. So I'm going to keep the saturation relatively high, but not too crazy. Pull that lightness down yet again because we want to darken it a whole bunch. And now that this is dulled, I'm going to go to filters, light and shadow, and then vignette. So vignetting adds this dark border effect. We want to be careful. We don't want to have, so if you kind of see, I can squeeze this in a whole bunch. We don't want to create like an oval structure. So we want to balance the radius, the softness, and the squeeze so that we end up with a more subtle effect. Okay, something like that. So now you can see it's a little bit more neutral. So we're going to go back to Pixabay. And I want something to frame the DM and the players. So I'm literally going to search for a frame. I want something like this, but not as busy. So this white one would actually work really well. I'd probably want to color adjust it. You can look for your heart to your heart's content. For right now, I'm going to go with this simple gold frame just because. I'm going to get it at a really high resolution, but you don't really need it there, so grab it at something appropriate. And we now have a frame. Is it beautiful? Is it amazing? Not really, but it'll do. I'm going to remove a little bit of it because it's actually pretty pretty thick. So I'm going to remove the inside just so we have a little bit thinner of a frame. In fact, it's probably still too thick. There's not really anything I can do about that except maybe pull it apart a little bit. Probably want to pull the saturation up so it can stand on its own, make it a bit darker, and then we really want to change the color to something that'll work a little bit better. I actually might go with like a silver. We'll pull the saturation all the way down to make it silver. There we go. It's still too thick. So I'm actually going to remove sections of it on the interior, but keep this cool little bevel shape. I'm going to cut these out and move them to the middle, which sounds very complex and fancy, but it should be pretty easy to do. So I'm going to use the free selection tool, zoom in a whole bunch. I'm actually going to cut out these little side sections. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to put them on their own layers. And you're not going to have to do this on every single piece that you do. It's just, I'm doing it because it's what's going to look good here. So if you find a frame that's skinnier, you'll probably just be able to use that out of the box versus what I'm doing. I messed up over there. Let's do it again. Okay, those have all been cut out. So you can see if I grab this section and move it, they're all gone. So my goal here is to remove the middle of this and kind of blend it together. It's not so important that I'm ultra precise. I can make up for it later. And then I'm going to take these interior pieces and move them kind of exterior, or rather move them in. So you can see what I mean in a second. Move it over. So you can kind of see I've created a new wholeness to the frame, and I've left these really cool ornate edges. So I'm going to do that for all the sections. All right, so now you can see that the frame is much thinner, but I kept all these ornate edges. So it'll give me a really interesting alpha profile. And if we zoom back out to 100%, to be able to see the entire thing at a single jump. Here's actually 100%. I now have a portrait, and I'm going to move these. So I'm going to move all these into a layer group, which will make my life a lot easier when dealing with them. Okay, give it an appropriate name. In this case, it's going to be the DM frame. So I like to put the Dungeon Master top left, the first thing that's seen. Now for each one of the additional layers, I'm just going to duplicate this. And if you want the players to have the same size as the Dungeon Master, you can go ahead and just copy them, paste them, position them anywhere you want as appropriate. I generally recommend that you use something square for your player view. Webcams are going to tend to be wider than higher, but you want to crop off some of the space because the human sits nicely in this kind of portrait view. But if you have the full width of a webcam, you're probably just going to have a whole bunch of empty room or whatever's behind them. So go ahead and create as many frames as you need. In this case, I'm going to probably put player character 1, and we'll create enough for 3 player characters. 3 players. You could fill the space like this and then maybe put a cutout over here for Roll20 or your chat window or your sponsors or what have you. I'm going to leave that up to your imagination. You're going to want to play around with this. For now, I just want to show you the basic cutouts. Okay, given all this, we probably want to add in some text. So you probably want to go to fonts.google.com. This is where I grab all my fonts and I type in something like whatever we want to name this campaign. So provide some name, and that'll let you have a reference when you're looking at the fonts to determine do they fit your style. I tend to go with something that's a little bit on the thicker side because it has to read even when it's really small. I like this. There's a lot of good fonts here, a lot of great fonts. So go ahead and pick some to your heart's content, install them. That'll be operating system dependent. Once you've found them, you should be able to enter them into here. So jailbreak campaign. Here's a font that I've been using extensively. Go ahead and set some text to indicate the name of the campaign, what's happening, and we'll move that out of here. We'll create a layer group called flag. And that's where I'm going to put my banner at the top, basically. Put an underline in here. And do whatever you want. It's your place to play, and it doesn't have to look super professional, honestly. And you can iterate on this as you go. I'd recommend spending some amount of time on this so that it looks good. I personally think this one looks really terrible. I just kind of wanted to give you an illustration. And don't forget to put your Twitch URL here so people know what they're watching. And so if you put it on YouTube, there's a reference to that for future viewing, future live viewing. And then, like I said, here you could add in another frame that you could render Roll20 in, or you could render your chat window or anything you want. But for now, I'm keeping it this simple. Maybe you have an additional player that you pop in right here. So we could do that so that it's not just empty space. If that's the case, maybe you want to create the vertical stack over here. Let's move some things around to make that work. So we want the DM frame maybe to stand alone. I like doing that. So we have the DM frame over here. Move everything over. Player 1 gets moved to around here. Player 2 over here. We'll move our Twitch layer appropriately. Probably want to go with something not as stark as white. That's okay. Player 3. Player 4. And this jailbreak flag we'll want to move somewhere like up here. It's not a crazy amount of room just because I didn't lay out things. You might want to shrink these, make them a little smaller, whatever you're going to do. That way it's a little easier to see. Down a little bit. What I can do is group all these frames together. Usually what I like to do is call this like a 4-player setup. And I'll throw all my frames in here. This way I can do things like grab the entirety and move it so that I can kind of see everything. And you could also shrink it as a group if you really needed to, something like this. And now it's a little bit smaller. If you really want to do that, but you're going to lose some fidelity doing that. And you could center it on the screen a little bit better. And you could respace this, whatever you want to do, but we're not going to do anything too crazy. Usually then I'm going to go ahead and make a duplicate of this background layer and throw it inside the 4-player setup, and I will show you why. So we have this background. I'm going to hide this one and just make this one visible. So my next step, you'll see that some individuals will do the compositing of these frames and the background and everything inside of OBS, but my personal preference is just to go ahead and cut it out right here. That way it's not rasterizing a whole bunch of different layers inside of OBS. There's no reason to. It's static. You're not going to move around these frames dynamically while you play. And so now that you have your transparencies here, 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 and here, what we can do is we can export this. So we go to File, Export As, and then you're going to give it some appropriate name. So over here I have main_4player_overlay. Overlay indicates that it's going to have transparency. It's an overlay. 4 players lets you know how many players are going to be participating in that session scene. I may have variants like 5 players, 3 players, etc. And main indicates that it's just kind of this main composited screen of player views instead of having something like Roll20. So if I was doing one that was Roll20, instead of saying main, it would say Roll20. So go ahead and export that. And if you haven't done so already, save your project. I usually call it something like campaign templates, as you know, I want to have potentially, right now I just have this 4-player setup, but if I had additional setups, I'd put in there as well. And that's it. You now are ready to add in this scene in OBS. Okay, so that's it. It's really simple to do. There's nothing too crazy about it. You really just need to choose a background, choose some frames, put them together, extract the transparent area, and then export the whole thing so that you can use it in OBS. Hopefully you found that educational, useful, simple enough. I know that I didn't really go over how to use GIMP too much, but again, all of that can be found online. It's a really powerful tool. If you found this useful in any way, shape, or form, please like, comment, subscribe. I'm very happy to do many more tutorials. If you really want me to dive into the idiosyncrasies of GIMP, I'm very happy to do that. You can do that anytime. I'm definitely going to be hooking this up into OBS in a future tutorial, showing you how to get everything hooked up so that you can begin live streaming your Dungeons & Dragons games. So thanks for watching.